Well, I am Claudia Romo Edelman, and this is Iri Losh, and this is the Global GoalsCast.
The podcast that asks, can you change the world?
And we're pleased to be here today with Laura Liswood, who's the Secretary General Council of the Women World Leaders.
It's comprised of women presidents, prime ministers, and heads of government. In 1997, Laura co-founded the White House Project, which is dedicated to electing a female president of the United States.
We're pleased to have you. Yesterday night, we got a conversation with two explorers that went to Antarctica, actually, as part of our podcast with devices. They went 60 days, 600 miles, only on renewable energy. And they had no idea about the Me Too movement. They came back, and there's a new reality. There's a lot that happened in the world when it comes to gender empowerment and women coming out and women speaking. Can you tell us, Laura, what do you think this will really mean, and whether this is going to change things, and whether you think there's a potential backlash?
Well, I think there's a lot what you just asked in those questions. And first off, it's great to be here.
Great.
Yes.
Nice to see you both. I think first off, it's very interesting to say how quickly some social norms can potentially be changed. You know, you've got your explorers who are gone for a couple of months, and they come back to this sort of shock.
A new world.
You know, new questions, new visibilities, new prescribed behaviors, you know, new social actions, et cetera. And although I think part of it, all of this has sort of been part of a wave of things that have been going on in terms of women and women's equality, gender parity. I mean, these kinds of things are not done in a vacuum. You know, they come from, you know, women, and you know, the million women, the march where 5 million women marched, you know, last year. Yeah,
Like building up.
Well, the Women's March was, you know, also symbolic of the kind of what's been going on. You know, I think it is interesting. It might be a little too soon to tell about how this all fits together, and you know, is this going to be a progressive movement, part of the progressive movement, or is this a one-off kind of thing that, you know, okay, this has happened and it's this big flurry, and then 5 months later, it's gone.
Have you seen this kind of thing before?
Well, you know, I think other things have sort of erupted periodically around this, but, you know, it seems, you know, and I don't know what sustained means anymore. Sustained used to mean 10 years. Now it means, you know, 3 months kind of thing. But, you know, one has to hope that, you know, the 2 steps forward, 1 step back actually does get you on the journey. Continue on the journey, because I think there are potential back steps to it, including what you just talked about, which is the backlash. You know, I think that there are potentials for that. I know I've had men who I've known for a very long time. You know, I go to hug them and they go, "Well, can I kiss you?" You know, just a friendly kiss, and I go, "Of course you can." You know, but it's on their mind. You know, at this point. So you know, but that's just reducing something to the ridiculous in a way. I mean, we're talking about women who have been, you know, who've been harassed, who've had their jobs threatened, who, you know, that's different than giving someone a kiss.
Well, there has been, like at least in my memory, a lot of progressive movement. I think that this was a spike. And the question is whether we can take this spike to create momentum and keep on actually just like advancing the agenda. But again, just going to the backlash, because 1 in every 4 girls in the world experiences sexual violence. And if you think of that in real terms, that means that if any, you know, like classroom photos or whatever you call them, the photo albums, a yearbook, that means that every 4 persons has been abused. And that has a familiar face, because normally it's the father or the uncle or someone. It's not the CEO that is famous on the, you know, Hollywood or in the media industry. So having people that are somehow coming out and using the opportunity and using the momentum of Me Too to say, like, he kissed me, or I feel uncomfortable, and that's enough, could backlash a little bit of the real issues that we're dealing with here. So do you think that there's any danger there? Would you give advice to people that are in this movement right now and say, like, okay, so watch out, there's a potential backlash if...
Well, I think you're absolutely right. We need to, when these kinds of things happen, we need to open the aperture. You know, we need to make the lens bigger, in the sense of what you were saying is, well, you've got this group of women from a very developed country making, you know, money, et cetera, but they've been able to get some notoriety. They've been able to get some media attention, as they should. But then you have to say, but wait a minute, what's happening in developing countries? what's happening to on the ground all the time. Now what we can hope is that because of that question, the question, of the actress, for example, who got sexually harassed, that actually then is tied in a cord, it's on a line to those 1 in 4 girls, kind of thing. That's opening up, the dialogue. Say, well, yes, this is happening, but incidentally, this is also happening. So to me, that's to the good if that conversation can happen. Do I think there could be a potential? I mean, you even referenced the fact, well, some men don't want to take meetings with me. Some men don't want to mentor women anymore. Some men don't want to take them out to dinner like they would take their male colleagues out to dinner, where you develop the bonding and the relationship and the kinds of things you need to get ahead in an organization. But I'm semi not worried about that if an organization has structured ways of mentoring, senior leadership mentoring junior people in a structured way, so it's just not this one-off, come have drinks with me kind of thing. So that just says, no, we actually need more policies and procedures around things that benefit dominant group members or, don't benefit non-dominant group members.
Right.
What about the scene in London last week, where I live, in the Dorchester Hotel with an all-male event? Male leaders hired a whole bunch of female hostesses who then were harassed, hands up the skirts, propositioned, a whole lot. I mean, it was horrible. To me, living in London, it doesn't feel like the same movement has reached there as it has in the United States. Do you see that can it spread?
Well, one hopes. I mean, I think even this, situation and how quickly it became such a news event, but it is, it is a bit head slapping, isn't it? Because you're sitting here thinking, okay, we just had all this big conversation around sexual harassment and all of that. So you think, what are these people, these male leaders, thinking when they go in?
Or not.
Or, well, or not thinking.
Yeah.
Or how is it that their annual reports of their companies can talk about how important it is to have diversity and inclusion and women's development and leadership. And then they themselves personally, do they not think that there's, I think one of the good things, if you can call it a good thing, is that leadership now is going to be more clear about reputational risk that happens when they do these kinds of things. So whether they truly care about women, whether they truly care about diversity, whether they truly, embrace it, or they just understand that, hey, we've got to say this. If you say, wait a minute, when you do that, it's going to be a reputational risk to your company, to your shareholders, to your investors.
The Financial Times put it on their cover page. Normally, they have the wall page, and as soon as it reached the 500,000 views, they open up the wall, and it's now in 1.2 million views. The story of the President's Club. So it's going like fire, and people are reading it and consuming it and putting it on the blacklist. And talking about the blacklist, I think that the World Economic Forum probably had a lot of people that they normally have, deleted from their invitations for this year in Davos, because independent of the degree of the accusation, or I am no one to judge whether someone has made a big sexual harassment or a minor sexual harassment, and I don't think that the rules of the game are clear there yet. Whether someone feels uncomfortable, it has been probably put on the same pot as someone that has been raped. But think about that. That blacklist is not going to be there for long, because probably we'll start to understand better the issue, and we'll start to differentiate. So there's probably going to come to a rehab time, isn't it? So how do you think that is going to be when men are starting to come back and start saying okay, listen, I made a mistake, I want to now help, or what do you think is going to come?
Well, I mean, it's hard to know when an epiphany will actually occur to someone, and what creates the sort of change in their own mindset. Personally, I think watching other men's behavior helps.
Right.
So, for example, in the event you referenced in London, the private club, if a critical mass of the men had said, "Wait a minute, don't do this," stop, this is inappropriate, I think that's what might have stopped the behavior. So men talking to other men, because if men see other men doing it, powerful men doing this kind of thing, well, it must be okay.
It takes place in a city where there are men-only clubs, where they have had meetings about whether to bring women in, and it has been voted down as recently as last year. I mean, it's incredible. How are we ever going to move the needle if we don't bring them on board? That's kind of my point, is that you've got to bring them into this conversation and make them understand, and I don't know how to do it.
Well, you certainly do have to bring men into the conversation. And that's here at the forum. There's been a lot of discussion about, okay, how do we bring men into this? You know, and you know, I think we can say, well, maybe we had some success. You listen to Justin Trudeau's speech, you know, which I suspect was about 80% on women in his comments. You know, you listen to Macron, you know, who talks about women. You listen to Jack Ma, who talked about women and the importance of getting women into the economy and the skill sets and how economies have to engage women. So, you know, now you're seeing some role models out there, some very powerful people.
Man-ambassadors, I heard them called.
Well, man-ambassadors, nice word. We have other kind of, you know, man-interrupters and all of that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong, or mansplainers. You know, man-ambassadors is probably as good a term as any. So, you know, see, but you do have to get to a tipping point. But then the real question is, do these men truly embrace, you know?
Right.
I mean, and it's not, I think, that people are evil. It's just that, you know, like with these all-men's club, that it's just comfortable for them. They're around people who are like themselves. They don't have to have anything guarded about their behavior or changing their behavior. It's a relic of in time, and I think they ultimately will. Particularly, I know in the United States, what's been effective is that shareholders and investors have asked, is the money for joining this club coming from the corporation? You know, and if it's coming from the corporation, it has to stop.
Right.
You know? And I think that, quite honestly, that's one of the ways this stuff stops.
You were mentioning Trudeau and Macron and some other, you know, heads of state talking very strongly about gender, but not all of them are. And some of them have been a bit abusive in their language when it comes to women.
You think? Yeah, no, I mean, there's at least one president I know who I doubt will be hired to do the sexual harassment training.
Right, right. But talk about that for a second. So, how do you get more women into politics? And that's part of what you have been saying in your book, the loudest talk, and in in your own campaign. You want to help women to get into politics and ultimately become president. How are you doing it, and who do you see that is potential? Do you like Oprah?
Well, everyone likes Oprah. I mean, you know, that's
president.
Yeah. You know, let me start first with, you know, clearly, if you want to find sort of the, you know, as they often call it, the pony in the pile of, you know, yeah, it is that women have been activated, at least in the United States, and I think in other countries too, to run for office, to get involved, to have these 5 million women marches, you know, that kind of thing. So there's been a real catalyst, a real, you know, if you say there's a backlash to something, there's been a backlash to what they've seen of these people in power. You know. So one is clearly we have to get more women into political positions because they're going to hopefully change laws, they're going to hopefully be role models, they're going to hopefully, you know, bring women's issues to the fore. You know. So have to do that at all levels in all governments. You know, and for, you know, generally speaking, hopefully women will progress. Right. You know, they'll become the governor of a state, and then they'll run for office. You know, one of the challenges, like in the United States, is we need at least 3 women running in each of the parties.
And who are you supporting to do that?
Well, I'm not supporting anyone particularly, but I certainly don't need 3 self-indulgent female billionaires, you know. Running for office, I need 3 qualified women. Yeah,
but
running.
You couldn't have had a more qualified woman than Hillary Clinton. I mean, let's put it on the line. Secretary of State. She couldn't have had more experience.
Yeah.
Up against a misogynist person who'd sexually assaulted women.
Yeah. Well, it turned out that, you know, apparently somewhat unbeknownst to that campaign, experience wasn't the driver. You know, what was the driver was this visceral sort of message to people who have felt left out of the economy, you know, who voted. And, you know, let's remember, of course, that just because of the quirk in our election system, she did win more popular votes. So, she actually was seen as the better qualified candidate, just the way our system works, that didn't happen. She was very experienced. She herself could have perhaps done some things differently in the campaigning that she did. Was she what I hear from virtually every head of state and government, and I've heard it for now 20 years, over-scrutinized.
Over-scrutinized.
Over-scrutinized by individuals and by the press. Yeah. The tolerance for mistakes for women is less than the tolerance for mistakes for men. They are scrutinized on their hair, their dress,
the way their voices.
Their voices.
When I went on Sky News the weekend before the election, she had lost her voice in Las Vegas. She was it was the end of the election. She'd been standing outside in the rain, and she was speaking to her supporters, and they came out of the clip from that and came to me and said, "Oh, she sounds a bit screechy, doesn't she?" And I thought, come on, you just can't use that language. You're not going to say Donald Trump sounds screechy, doesn't he?
Well, and some of the research will prove that that's exactly what happens. She screeched, he forcefully spoke.
But I want to ask something, Laura. What are women saying? At least, I'm not asking you to quote anybody, but what are women saying behind scenes that or doing with all this movement and the reaction to male leaders are talking and acting and handshaking the way what's the behind the scenes language really about
look
all
at
this?
These women see this kind of behavior. They've seen it before. They've been potentially subjected to it before themselves. So that for many of them, and I can't say how many or all of them or what, there's a bit of eye rolling going on. But it's not that they haven't experienced somewhat similar kinds of things. It's not that they haven't seen that testosterone levels go up, with the men around the table.
But now that there's a movement of empowerment, maybe, beyond the eye rolling, maybe there's a desire to come and bite or bark a little bit more.
Well, we'll see. Don't forget, heads of state and government,
Don't bark normally.
with some exception, are, are relatively diplomatic. The rules seem to have changed a bit with this particular president who's pushed the barriers a bit.
It's interesting. I was speaking to the Prime Minister of Norway yesterday, or 2 days ago. I'm slightly losing track of time. And I asked her, you managed to convince Trump to come out and say, might be able to go roll back some of what I said on climate change. How did you do it? She said, well, it's amazing when you speak their language. So I went and just pointed out all of the business reasons behind investing in a green economy and pointed out how many Teslas actually get driven in Norway. And he said, oh, that's really interesting. And he came out afterwards and then said, of course, we could roll back some of the things on the Paris Accord. And by the way, I'd really prefer to have migration from Norway.
Well, the migration from Norway comment was a bit much, But, look, I think women in particular have figured out how to deal with men. How she said, speak the language. What she's saying is, okay, I've figured out what makes this guy tick. I've observed this, and women do that. Women are far more aware of the dynamics than men are of women's dynamics and everything. And, you mentioned my book, The Loudest Duck. I call that the elephant and mouse theory.
Right.
If you're the elephant in the room, you don't need to know anything about the mouse. But if you're the mouse in the room, you need to know everything about the elephant. And so if women have been historically, the mouse in the sense of out of power, et cetera.
And let me ask you the last question. So how do you see Davos, in 5 years? What kind of animals would we have if not elephant and mouse?
Look, I've been coming to Davos for quite a long time, so I've been able to see the arc of change here at the forum. I mean, initially when there were some women's things here, they were not in the forum itself. They were out in the Congress Hall. They were out one of the hotels. Then they finally brought it in. They started the Women Leaders Initiative in 2002. The forum is also a mirror of society, right? I mean, they're trying to also shape society, but they're also a mirror of it. So if you say, who are our main clients here? They're CEOs and chairmen, right? Okay. Well, as we know, there's, the number of women CEOs and chairmen can basically fit in a phone booth, if you could find a phone booth. But it means 5%, 6%. So the very fact that there are 20% women when their major client base is 5% women, 6% women, is really interesting. But it's always things like the 7 women chairs. It's who are the women on the panels. It's what's the programming. What are the issues that get brought up? In addition to who are the women who come here. So 5 years from now, unfortunately, because the gender gap report has actually shown that we're losing. It's taking us longer and longer to close the gender gap. I hate to think now it's 217 years. It was 170 last year. Now it's 217 or something like that. So my optimistic self doesn't want it to continue to get, further and further behind, I think. But
so you're saying elephant and the mouse, but more mouse.
I'm thinking that that's exactly what will happen. The forum is not going to stop the initiatives that it has on gender.
But the world is not going to change that much.
But yeah, whether they're pulling the world along is another question.
Right. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being with us in the Global GoalsCast. And
I'm Edie Lash, and this is Claudia Romo Edelman.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.